Hello, I'm Gemma and this is Non-Fic Books, and I have more apologies to make because I disappeared off the face of the planet for quite a long time. So hopefully I am back into making videos a bit more often, and I thought I'd start with an Austen August to get myself back into the swing of things, and who doesn't love a little bit of alliteration. So this is going to be a month of all things Austen related, both fiction and non-fiction, and I thought I would start off with a video on which Austen book I think you should either start with or pick up next. The first one I think is the best place to start if you are totally new to Austen and you are a more on the younger side reader. Not because it's any less good quality than any of the others, but I think the character and some of the situations she ends up in is slightly more relatable if you are younger. And that's Northanger Abbey. This is a wonderful story of the very naive, literary obsessed heroine Catherine Morland, who goes to Bath with some rich neighbours and falls into a world that she has never known before, and it's her trying to find out how you tell which are the good people and which are the less good people, who can you trust and how can you go about living properly. This is wonderful. If you're a fan of the Gothic, this is a really sort of loving mixtape of both Gothic and novels, and to me one of my all-time favourite literary heroes is Mr. Tilney, because I think he is a lot less exciting maybe than some of the others, but he is so sort of normal and commonsensical that he would be the man I would want to end up with in real life. He is just wonderful, and this is a fantastic place to start with Austen. The next one is probably the most romantic book I have ever read. The final scene where they sort of express their love to each other is the most romantic thing I have ever read. So if you're a big romantic, read Persuasion. It is a beautiful novel. I have 3 top Jane Austen books, with a 4th that is my most emotionally attached to, and this is one of them. I love this book. It is the beautiful story of Anne, who has fallen in love when she was younger and with a relatively poor naval officer. And he's a half-pay officer, which is really quite junior, and she's the daughter of a baronet, and she is persuaded by family and friends not to marry him. 8, I think, years later, if not a little bit more, she is still single. He turns up on the scene and is dashing and successful, and it's about whether or not he can get over having been chucked by her when he was younger, and whether she can learn to, even though her family is still anti him, to go with her heart rather than the opinions of others. This is beautiful. It's got wonderful settings, it's gorgeous when it goes down in Lyme Regis, it's got some of my favourite sort of additional characters around them, because I think a lot of the naval characters are wonderful. This is a really cracking book, and obviously one of Jane Austen's brothers was in the Navy, so she gets a lot of the naval things really accurately and quite in depth, so I think this is absolutely wonderful. The next one, obviously, is the most classic place to start. It's, if anyone's only read one, it's quite often this book, and that's Pride and Prejudice. This is certainly where I started. I read this in primary school after having watched hundreds of times the 1995 adaptation with Colin Firth and Jennifer Ely. From before I could even understand it really, I was watching that with my mum, and I totally fell in love with it, and by the time my brother was 7 it was his favourite thing to put on, so we watched loads of that, so I had to pick up this book, and I think that's what a lot of people do. I think this is a great place to start if you are an Austen fan who's never actually read an Austen. If you love the adaptations, if you love this time period, if you love other books, say like Georgette Heyer, this is the classic place to start. Obviously it's about Lizzie Bennet, one of 5 sisters, who they all really need to marry because the estate is entailed away to their cousin, and a lot of drama ensues, but there is a very, very rich man in the area who is very snobby and who slights her at first, so obviously both of them suffer with their pride and their prejudice. It's wonderful. Like, if you're into books as a woman, like, surely you want to be Lizzie, almost everyone does. It's wonderful, the characters are great, it is a lovely place to start, but it's not necessarily the place I would start. I'd almost sort of save it because it's so lovely. And that's definitely the book of hers that I have the most emotional attachment to, and I think a lot of people do, even though it's probably not my favourite. One of my favourite books is Sense and Sensibility. I adore this. Eleanor is my favourite character out of all of the Austens. I think she is absolutely fabulous. This is about two sisters, Eleanor and Marianne, and their romantic attachments. Oh, one is much younger and very sort of emotional and very passionate and leaves decorum by the wayside a little bit because of her feelings, and the other is more staid and sensible. They are beautiful characters. It is so well written. You can really feel for these characters, and I think this is a book if you have sisters that you are very close to, or if you are a little bit of an older person who hasn't read any Austen and would like to get into Austen. I think Sense and Sensibility is a really good place to start because I think it is just such a wonderfully written novel. I absolutely love it, and I do think it is a good place to start. And if you can't love these characters, then really, I just don't know what can be done. The next one, don't start with this book. Mansfield Park is by far my least favourite book. I've read it loads, and yet I still cannot stand this book because the hero's a prat, and the heroine I would love to beat to death, but she'd probably enjoy it because she loves being a victim. Ugh! I cannot stand Fanny Price in this. The writing's lovely, a lot of the scenarios are very funny, so it's definitely one to read. I don't think you should avoid this, but do not start with this because I don't think you'll pick up another Austen. This is probably the last one to get to, or maybe save one more after it so you can finish on a high. But I'd read the Juvenilia before I read this because it's just better. Yeah, I have very little to say about this. If you love Fanny Price and Mansfield Park, tell me what I'm missing, because I've read it so many times. I reread all of these books every year, and some of them more than once a year. This is definitely an only once a year sort of one, and it hasn't grown on me. What am I missing? If you love it, tell me why you like it. Emma. This is probably not a good place to start. It's not one of my favourites, but it's not a bad book, and I think it is one that is most often sort of viewed as her most accomplished novel. It's definitely more complex, it's very multi-layered, it is a beautifully well-crafted novel. But again, it's just, the hero is delicious as always, but Emma herself, she is a very annoying character, and I'm all for flawed characters who learn to improve, but she's so flawed that she rubs me up the wrong way totally. It's still a wonderful book, but it's definitely not one I'd suggest starting with. This is a good sort of third book maybe to pick up. It is really wonderful. The characters that you meet are great. Some of the funniest characters Austen's written is in this book, but I'd be really interested if you have read it, because I think Emma as a character would allow for a very good title that is along the lines Pride and Prejudice, Sense and Sensibility. If you have any suggestions for what you think Emma should be renamed along those lines, leave it down below, because I think with her character flaws you could get some really interesting things. Mr. Light is just heaven. So those are the main Austen novels. Obviously there are her letters and her Juvenilia that I really recommend reading. Her letters show a really interesting insight, even though such a sort of small amount of them remains, they are still worth a read. And her Juvenilia is brilliant, especially if you're wondering where to start, try The Watsons. I wish that had been turned into a full novel because it's just beautiful. And I really wanted to know what happened to those characters. But that's where I think people should start. Where have you started? If you have any ones that you're really looking to read but you just can't sort of get yourself started or something, leave it down below. I'd be really interested to know which books sort of appeal and which books put people off the most when it comes to Austen. If you're looking for Austen non-fiction, then hopefully you will see quite a few videos over this month recommending different ones, and I will see you in one of those videos soon. Bye!